In the heart of Dublin, the heavy doors of the RTE studios opened to history tonight. The lights were brighter, the cameras sharper, the atmosphere more intense. Ireland was locked into what was perhaps the most tense television encounter in the last 30 years. The stage was set. On one side of the table sat Ireland's elderly but charismatic president, Michael D. Higgins. Approaching 80, he stood there with his small frame but immense historical weight. The confidence of his half-century-long political journey was evident on his face. His voice, his poetic eloquence, his calm yet aristocratic demeanour. For many Irish people, he was still like a father figure. But tonight, he was not facing the usual politicians, journalists or academics. He was facing a storm. Conor McGregor. Emerging from cage fighting, leaving his mark on the arena with blood, sweat and iron discipline, but also one of Ireland's most controversial figures. To some, a rough street kid, to others, the nation's bravest voice. But there was one truth everyone agreed on. McGregor never shuts up, he never backs down, and when he speaks, he always makes waves. The studio crowd held its breath. Minutes earlier, the hashtag McGregor versus Higgins had already trended worldwide on social media. From the New York Times to Al Jazeera, everyone was watching this debate live. Because it wasn't just Ireland talking here. Here the old and the new, tradition and defiance, authority and the street would clash. Cameras ready. The moderator's voice rose. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Before you are two figures who will debate Ireland's destiny, President Michael D. Higgins and Conor McGregor." Applause broke out among the audience, but boos rose at the same time. Ireland was divided. Some were on Higgins's side, others on McGregor's. Conor strode onto the stage. He walked with his usual gait, shoulders swaying, a defiant gleam in his eyes. It was as if this were a UFC match and his opponent was not Higgins but the entire system. His suit fit him perfectly, but the tattoo marks on his body were still visible. McGregor seemed ready not just to talk here, but to fight. He sat down at the table. He looked into Higgins's eyes. That look was like a fighter in the ring locking on to his opponent, saying, "There's no escape now." Higgins, however, responded calmly, with almost Buddhist patience. Without saying a word, he simply waited to return McGregor's fire. The first few minutes passed routinely. The moderator asked questions, Higgins gave poetic and polite answers, and McGregor responded with short, sharp sentences. But everyone knew this was just the opening. Then the moment arrived. The moderator asked, "Who do you believe represents Ireland's future?" Higgins took the microphone with confidence. "I have worked for my people all my life. Culture, art, diplomacy, peace, these are the soul of Ireland. We cannot look to the future without knowing our roots, without understanding our poets, our historians, our struggles. Mr. McGregor, you cannot represent Ireland. You are a fighter in the ring, yes, but understanding the spirit of a nation is done not with fists, but with a pen, with vision." The room erupted in applause. Higgins's supporters seemed ready to rise to their feet. McGregor fell silent. His eyes narrowed, and at that moment everyone in the studio felt it. The real fight was just beginning. "The spirit of the nation, you say, Michael," McGregor began. His voice was low but firm and sharp. That voice had been heard thousands of times in the ring. Now it was reaching millions of people. "I grew up on the streets of Finglas. I went hungry. I worked. I fought. I learned to survive. You talk to me about the spirit of the nation. The spirit you speak of doesn't just live in poetry books. The spirit lives in the sweat of a father working 3 jobs for his mother, in the courage of young people migrating for their future, in the footsteps of workers forced to go to work on cold mornings. You never lived their lives, Michael. I did. My fists belong not just to me, but to them too. I carried Ireland's spirit in the ring, not in your palace chair." And "Hoo!" rose from the hall. It was like a football stadium. Clips were immediately shared on social media. Higgins frowned slightly. McGregor wasn't backing down. "You tell me it's about vision. Your vision is in the past. My vision is in the future.
You want to put Ireland in a museum. I want to introduce Ireland to the world. You look at history. I look to tomorrow. That's the difference."
The moderator immediately stepped in, trying to calm the discussion, but it was useless. The atmosphere was electric. At that moment, Conor McGregor made his move. He didn't get up from the table, but leaned forward, placing his fist on the table. This was the signal for that finishing move that millions had memorized in the ring. And let me tell you this, Michael, tonight is not just a debate, it is a turning point. You represent the past, I represent the future. You speak from books, I speak from the streets. Tonight, Ireland will decide who speaks the truth, the man who lives by poetry or the man who comes from the fire. In the studio, screams, applause and boos mingled together. Higgins gripped the microphone tightly. For the first time, a look of tension appeared on his face. This old politician realized that he was not facing the kind of opponent he was used to, because McGregor was challenging him not only with his words, but with his very presence. And all of Ireland's eyes and ears were now on these two men. The silence was short-lived. Higgins raised the microphone. His voice, despite his age, rose in a clear, smooth, teacherly tone. "Mr. McGregor, you cannot set yourself as an example for this country's youth, its children. You may be a fighter in the ring, but you are also a symbol of brute force. The crowd cheering you on may admire your fists, but Ireland cannot be governed by fists alone. Ireland stands on reason, art and poetry. You are a temporary sensation. I, however, am the representative of this country's centuries-old values." Higgins's supporters in the studio applauded enthusiastically. At that moment, the cameras captured a smile of victory on Higgins's face. But McGregor still hadn't moved. He listened calmly, as if waiting for his opponent to finish his combination in a fight. Then he suddenly leaned forward. He grabbed the microphone. "Sensational," he murmured, but that voice filled the studio. There was no anger in it. It was a fighter using every word like a weapon sharpened like a knife. "Michael, you call me brute force. Those punches carried me from zero to the top of the world. In my hands there is not only power, but courage. I was not afraid. I wasn't afraid of poverty. I wasn't afraid of defeat. And millions of young people looked at me and saw this. If Conor can do it, so can I. You call it brute force, but they call it hope." Some of the audience leapt to their feet. Shouts rose. McGregor continued, his voice growing louder. "You say to me, poetry, art. Yes, these are beautiful things, but Ireland isn't just poetry. Ireland is also the courage of men who died on hunger strike, the drama of young people forced to emigrate when they lost their jobs, the determination of workers who start work at 4 in the morning. You can perhaps describe these things in poetry, but I lived them, and I showed the world what I lived through with my fists. Your pen may remain in books, but my fists were etched into the hearts of millions on the screens." Suddenly, he slammed his fist on the table. The microphone crackled. The cameras quickly zoomed in. McGregor's eyes were burning like fire. "And one more thing, you say I'm temporary, but you, Michael, are already history. You belong in museums, old books, portraits on walls. I am the voice of the streets, of those living today, of those who will fight tomorrow. I am not the temporary one, you are." There was a moment in the studio as if electricity had struck. Higgins's face flushed. For the first time, he raised his voice. "You're being disrespectful, Mr. McGregor." McGregor, however, smiled, that famous smile from all the rings. Then he replied in a calm, mocking voice,
No, Michael, I'm just telling the truth. The truth is harsh, I know, but that's why I'm here, because this country wants to hear the truth now, not from palaces, but from the streets, not from books, but from life. The audience went wild. On social media, the hashtag not poems but punches started trending simultaneously. Higgins took a deep breath, stood tall with her small frame. It was as if an old king was resisting with all his might to protect his throne.
And thus the first real clash occurred. Higgins's verbal attack was met with a swift, heavy and deadly response, like McGregor's combination in the ring. But this was only the beginning, because no blood had been shed yet. Higgins took a deep breath. He adjusted his glasses. His voice had taken on a sharper, almost cutting tone this time. "Mr. McGregor, you cannot be this country's representative, because you are not only brute force, but also a source of shame. Open the newspapers, look at the headlines, your drunken brawls, your nightclub excesses, your extravagant indulgences. Is this what will represent Ireland? You may be proud of your achievements in the ring, but you have repeatedly disgraced your country with scandals. Accept that." Some in the hall shouted "Bravo" loudly. Higgins's supporters seemed to rise to their feet. For the first time, the anger in the old man's voice was energising him from the crowd. The cameras turned to Conor. There was a moment of silence. McGregor leaned back in his chair, taking deep breaths. Then he slowly smiled. "Shame," he said softly. The murmur in the hall grew louder. Everyone was waiting for the answer. McGregor leaned forward. He took the microphone in his hand. "Look, Michael, you're talking about my scandals. Yes, I've fought. Yes, I've made mistakes. Sometimes I got drunk. Sometimes I acted arrogantly. All of that is true. But that's exactly why people watch me, because I'm a real person." Murmurs rose in the hall. McGregor continued, his voice growing louder. "Have you never made a mistake? Of course you have, but you hid them. You made them disappear. My mistakes were in front of the whole world. Everyone saw them, every fall, every mistake. But what did I do? I got up. I came back every single time, because that's the story of my life, falling and getting up. And that's the story of Ireland too, Michael." He slammed his fist on the table once more. This time it was harder. The camera angle widened, showing the tension in the studio as if it were a physical vibration. Ireland fell many times. It fell with hunger, it fell with colonialism, it fell with emigration. But each time it got back up. That's who I am. My life is a mirror of Ireland's life. You call them mistakes, I call them scars. And remember, Michael, the one who bears the most scars proves they fought the hardest. The crowd screamed. A group began chanting, "Conor! Conor! Conor!" Higgins's face was stern, but a brief hesitation flashed in his eyes, because Conor had turned the attack around and gained the upper hand in the eyes of the crowd. Higgins pursed his lips. He placed his hand on the table. He raised the microphone, but the calmness had vanished from his face. In place of that old poetic sage was an angry politician. This fight was no longer just a battle of words, but a clash of spirits. Higgins leaned forward with a weary but stubborn expression on his face. He gripped the microphone with both hands. This time his voice was slower, heavier, almost like a teacher giving a lesson.
"Mr. McGregor, you talk a lot, but you don't listen. Ireland has survived not with fists, but with culture, with its poets, its literature, its music. Our identity lies in Joyce's lines, Yeats' verses, Heaney's words. Our struggle is written in hunger strikes. You don't understand these things, because you don't read, you only strike. You're an individual spectacle, whereas I represent the history and culture of this nation. Whatever you are, I know the spirit of Ireland better than you do." Higgins' supporters in the hall applauded enthusiastically. The old man's voice trembled, but every word was imbued with academic authority. The cameras turned to McGregor. He was chuckling. He shook his head from side to side, as if he saw his opponent behaving exactly as he wanted. Then he leaned forward. He raised the microphone. His voice was as sharp as a knife. I know Joyce, I know Yeats, I know Heaney, but I've done more than them, because I lived the Ireland they wrote about. I turned their poetry into reality in the ring. A murmur rose in the hall. McGregor sped up, his voice growing louder with each sentence. You talk about culture. My culture is the streets of Finglas. My culture is the soup my mother simmers in the kitchen. My culture is the step of the worker whose shoes are worn out on his way to work. You look for culture in books. I find it in people. And let me tell you this, those people watched me, they supported me, they believed in me. Because I showed them the truth, you tell them fairy tales. He paused for a moment. He tapped his fist on the table slowly. This time it was calm, but deadly serious. You say I'm a showman. A showman? The Irish flag was there in every fight I ever had. With my victories, the name of Ireland was heard all over the world, from Las Vegas to Tokyo. Children looked at me and said, he's Irish, one of us. Your poems stayed on bookshelves. My fists echoed on every screen in the world. Who promoted Ireland more, you or me? A loud ooh rose from the crowd. Clips were shared instantly on social media. The hashtag Ireland on my shoulders trended. McGregor continued, his voice now carrying the tone of victory. You hid Ireland, I showed it to the world. You put Ireland in a museum, I brought it to the ring. You were the poet of the past, I'm the warrior of the present. And remember, Michael, people may remember the poems, but they never forget the fists. All hell broke loose in the studio. Applause, cheers and screams mingled together. Higgins' face flushed crimson with momentary rage. In his old body there was a stubbornness that sought to defend his entire history, but McGregor's words had seeped into the crowd's veins. The moderator helplessly raised his hand, saying, please, please calm down. But no one was calm, because this was no longer a battle, it was a battle. And in the battle, for the first time, Higgins seemed to be backing down. Higgins took off his glasses and placed them on the table. His small frame bore the weariness of the years, but his eyes still shone with steely determination. He picked up the microphone, his voice rising without a tremor. Mr. McGregor, whatever you say, you cannot change one thing. You are selfish. You have always thought only of yourself. You won in the ring, you collected the money, you enjoyed the fame. Yes, people watched you, but they lived not for your victories, but for their own hopes. You cannot represent a nation, because a nation grows not through the pride of an individual, but through shared sacrifice. You are not a warrior for a people, but only for yourself. Higgins' supporters in the hall rose to their feet, and a storm of applause erupted. The old man's voice echoed as if given one last lesson. At that moment, Higgins positioned himself as Ireland's sage, a leader who made sacrifices for the people, who was humble, who represented the common spirit of the nation. But McGregor didn't budge. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Then he slowly leaned forward. He smiled. That famous "Here it comes" smile from the ring appeared on his face. He grabbed the microphone, and the words landed like a right hook in the ring. Selfish? A murmur spread through the hall. McGregor continued, his voice now fiery yet controlled.
Yes, I was selfish. I thought of myself, because no one else thought of me. The state didn't think of me. The system didn't think of me. My neighbourhood didn't think of me. I had to be selfish to survive, and that selfishness taught me to punch. It taught me to survive. He tapped his finger on the table, each tap echoing the words. And that's why people look at me, because my individuality is actually their rebellion. My pride is their silenced pride. When I shouted my name in the ring, I was actually shouting their names too. My victory was their dream. My fall was their pain. My rise was their hope. You call me selfish, but millions of people cried with me, shouted with me, lived with me. Is that selfishness? A loud woo rose from the crowd. The spectators looked at each other. Some wiped away tears.
McGregor continued, his voice growing even harsher. You tell me that a nation grows through sacrifice. True, but know this. I put my own body, my own blood in that ring. Every blow I took in that ring, the Irish flag was on my back. In that ring I wasn't just Conor, I was Ireland. Your sacrifice was in the stands, mine was on the blood-soaked floor. While you spoke, I took beatings. While you wrote, I broke my bones. While you recited poetry, I gave my life in the cage. And I did all this not just for myself, but for the name of Ireland. McGregor stood up. With this movement, the entire studio leapt to its feet. Security rushed forward in concern, but McGregor simply held his microphone and looked into Higgins's eyes. You tell me that a nation does not grow on the pride of an individual, but know that sometimes one person's pride breaks a people's chains. My pride is Ireland's self-confidence. My individuality is their collective cry. Your humility silenced them. My cry awakened them. And that is why, Michael, it is not you, but I who am the voice of this nation. A thunderous applause erupted in the hall. People were cheering. Clips were spreading across social media in seconds. The #Voice of Ireland trended. Higgins gripped the microphone with his small hands. His face bore a mixture of anger and sadness because McGregor had turned his final argument up its head. And in that moment, one truth echoed across Ireland's screens. This debate had ceased to be a debate and had become a national legend. The studio was still echoing with cheers. McGregor's words had struck a chord with millions watching on screen, but Michael D. Higgins had no intention of giving up yet. The 82-year-old man had spent his entire life immersed in politics, literature and art, and now he was facing a fighter who was breaking all the rules. Higgins grasped the microphone once more. His breath was deep, his words as cool as ice. Mr. McGregor, he said slowly, you are a powerful fighter, there is no denying that, but you must understand this. Governing a nation is not done with fists, it is not done with anger. Being the leader of a nation requires maturity, it requires calmness. You may be a hero in the ring, but the ring is not a nation. A nation is patience. A nation is unity. A nation is the work of wisdom and responsibility, not anger. You, Mr. McGregor, are just a brawler, and that is why you can never be the true leader of Ireland. A silence fell over the hall. Higgins' words hung in the air like a heavy blow. At that moment, many thought, perhaps Higgins was right. Perhaps McGregor really was just a fighter. But just then, Conor McGregor stood up. His face bore that famous wild smile, his eyes ablaze. He grabbed the microphone, paused for a moment. It was as if all of Ireland had held their breath.
Michael, he said, his voice low but as clear as steel. I am a fighter, true, but guess what? Who built this country? Poets? Politicians? No. This country was built by fighters, people who fought for freedom, who took bullets, who fought in the streets, in the fields, in the factories, on the ships. He took a step forward, his voice rising. You talk to me about maturity, but the people are born not of maturity, but of courage. You talk to me about calmness, but Ireland did not become independent through calmness, but through shouting. You talk to me about patience, but when patience turned into chains, it was people like me who broke them. The hall was beginning to boil. McGregor continued, each sentence landing like a punch. Yes, I am a fighter, but I don't fight alone. I am Ireland's fight. You say you are a leader, but your leadership is confined to sitting in a chair. My leadership was born in the streets, in the stands, in the ring. You know the nation from books, I know it from my blood. You wrote it, I lived it. McGregor slammed his fist on the table, making the microphone shake.
A nation is governed by wisdom, true, but wisdom is not only the right of the elderly, but also of the fire. You call me a fighter. I say this to you. If Ireland's destiny requires a fighter, I am here. If this people wants a shout, I am here. And if this nation wants to stand tall again with pride, I am that foot, I am that fist, I am that Ireland. The hall erupted, a storm of applause, cheers, whistles. The camera zoomed in on the fire in Conor's eyes. At that moment, everyone felt it. This was no longer a debate, it was a knockout. Michael D. Higgins bowed his head. That moment was when an old leader accepted defeat against a young rebellion, because McGregor's words were not just an answer, they were a manifesto, a national cry. And history recorded that moment thus. Higgins fought with his words, McGregor fought with his spirit, and that night Ireland witnessed the victory of the spirit. If these kinds of stories make you think, move you, or challenge you, you're in the right place. Subscribe to my channel, because here, every week we tell the stories others keep hidden, openly, deeply, and courageously. Thank you for watching. Remember, it's not where you come from, but what you're prepared to stand for that defines you.